Hi, everyone. I am Kimbyrleigha, and this is Kimbyrleigha Live, where I discuss current and ongoing true crime cases, breaking down legal aspects in an easy to understand manner, if I can speak, while I brush up on the law because I'm also sitting for the bar exam next year in 2026. So I've said this before if you've been here, but it helps me so much to watch trials, to talk about the cases, to dive into the law. And if you are new here, I have a main true crime channel here on YouTube as it's just my name, Kimbyrleigha, as well as a podcast, a video podcast here with my husband called Dark Livity. You can look for both of those below. I'm sure they're in the description box. Also, just want to make sure my audio is working. So I rely on the chat to tell me if anything is wrong. And I also want you to know I am currently practicing. This is me. I'm human. I make mistakes. This is live. I can't edit anything. And I'm practicing because I'm gearing up to discuss the Idaho case, Brian Koberger's trial, which is going to be going on in August if everything stays how it's supposed to be. So, as soon as I know that everything is working correctly with my audio, we're going to jump into day 17. I apologize that I didn't get this out on Saturday. After Friday's little sickness that I had to take a break. And Sundays I spend with my family. So this is the first day that I've had a chance to really recap day 17. This is Friday's trial date. Okay. So day 17 started with the judge, Canoni, scolding the jury a little bit. This was in regard to reactions from the jury when it came to the red solo cups. A lot of you mentioned this when we were on live last time. They were kind of rolling their eyes, scoffing a little bit from what I read online. A problem, right? Because you're not really supposed to be reacting that way. That should be held no matter what. And I'm actually surprised that anyone on the jury would openly react to either side's evidence until they deliberate. Because right now, we've only been hearing from the Commonwealth, which is the prosecution. The defense has not laid out their case yet. So, and there were some people that asked um, whether or not they would be kicked off the jury. I don't think it went to that level. It didn't seem to be to the point where somebody would be dismissed, but they essentially got a warning. And I want you to hear that right now. So let's start there and then we'll proceed because I thought it was interesting just to kind of get the perspective of Judge Canoni. And if there's any problems with the audio today, it's YouTube. You can start over, you can refresh. I'm trying my best here. I'm plugged in. Everything should be a okay.
Did anyone happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case since we left yesterday? I have one other important instruction for you folks, and it's so important that each and every juror can hear the evidence or the testimony that's presented.
It would be really helpful if you could see court, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be helpful? Wouldn't it be helpful, Kimber? Yes, it would. My apologies. See what I mean? Oh my goodness.
Everyone said yes and nodded affirmatively. Were you also able to follow my instructions and refrain from doing any independent research or investigation into this case? Yes. Everyone said yes and nodded affirmatively. Did anyone happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case since we left yesterday? I have one other important instruction for you folks, and it's so important that each and every juror can hear the evidence or the testimony that's presented, can follow the testimony, and can understand and evaluate the testimony of each witness and the exhibits. In order to do that, I just want to be very clear that it's important that people do not comment on the evidence or make any comments. Once you enter the room, it's probably a good idea to just listen. Don't talk. Don't make any facial expressions. No muttering under your breath. No audible noises, because people need to hear what's going on and to understand everything. So out of respect for your fellow jurors, I would ask that you be very careful to make sure you don't do that, and out of respect to the lawyers who worked so hard to get this case before. Okay? Thank you very much.
What this tells me, though, which is interesting, I think, is that the jury is just like us, which is why I say everyone's welcome here. The jury is not going to always agree either. When they go back there to deliberate, there are going to be people on both sides. There's going to be some people that believe one thing, some people that believe another. So I think it's interesting because nobody should hate each other just because they have a different perspective, right? We're all coming together, analyzing things together. But what this shows me, and I pointed this out last time, a lot of people are aware of, you know, crime scene investigations. They've watched something as basic as CSI shows, and they probably are aware that evidence collection is usually taken very seriously. So that's how I was thinking like a juror. I was like, they're probably rolling their eyes or scoffing because they're like, this is ridiculous. But what I also wanted to point out, the blood that was collected, as much as it looks like a botched investigative technique, because I mean, come on, it's not that important in the grand scheme of things. Do you know what I mean? Like the blood inside the solo cups, it's not exactly this kind of smoking gun. It That's all I wanted to point out. But let's move on because next, Brennan introduced another documentary clip, and guess what? I have it this time. I messed up last time, but guess what? I've got it queued up for you. So let's take a listen to this. Also, I don't want to neglect the comments. I wasn't feeling well last time, so it was hard for me to kind of go over there, but I'm going to put them up on the screen. And then if there are any that we should discuss, I will do so. If I forget yours, it's not on purpose. Here we go.
Jurors hear better with that on?
So John's laying there, his left and his right, and I approach John from the left. That's where the street is. And he had a piece of glass, like perched on his nose, like just wedged like a splinter would be. And I just pulled it, and as soon as I pulled it, it just gushed blood down his face.
I'm very interested to get your thoughts. And for reference, I mean, you just heard it right. But this is Karen talking about what she saw and what she did when she found John's body lifeless on the snow at 34 Fairview. She said he had a piece of glass perched, is that the word she used, on the left side of his nose. Now, note, the medical examiner said there was a tiny cut on the left side of John's nose. So Karen said she pulled glass from the side of his nose and it gushed blood. Now, I wondered about this, and I am certainly not a doctor by any means, but I do know from studying that blunt force trauma to the head can make pressure build up. And if something is embedded in your skin, especially somewhere that's very vascular, and if you're a woman and you've had, let's say, like filler, I'm just going to go there, you'll know that the lips, the face, the nose, it's all very vascular, right? We have little veins, and that can bleed heavier than usual. And that's because there are just so many of those little tiny blood vessels close to the surface of our skin. And if there was a piece of glass, let's just say, embedded in his nose like that, and it stayed in there as the pressure built up, and then you take it away, that's why they sometimes mention when somebody has like a rod that came, this is like Final Destination, but something that came off of a truck or something and goes through the windshield and like embeds in them, they say, don't remove it. Don't remove it. Just leave it in place until surgical means can happen, right? But that's kind of the same concept here. Could that have happened? Yes. We really don't know how long he'd been out there. You have to really think of that. We really don't know. But my question is, why did Karen do all these interviews to the media? Because I don't think it was a good idea. I do understand that she wanted to get her voice out there. She wanted to get her story out there. I don't think she's going to be testifying on the stand. But I also think that, the Commonwealth is now attempting to use her own words against her. And I think that they played this because the broken cocktail glass comes up in this line of questioning by Brennan later. But what are your thoughts on this? I know that not everyone can always make it to the lives, but Kay Owen said, is it just me? Or does everyone know not to pull something out like that? It's kind of what we just said. I was like, wait a minute. You don't pull it out, you just leave it. But also, would you do that? Or is it just in the moment and you're not really thinking and it's chaotic and you're like, oh my goodness, what's going on? Why is this there? It does make you question some things though. But I do want to move on because I want to try to make this very, like not fast paced, but get through it so that people on the replay can also kind of go through it. Oh, Courtney has something to say. By the way, Courtney's my best friend. She's also one of the mods. Do you think she's filming another documentary this trial too? I know not everyone knows this, but I went to a private screening of which one did I go to? Oh my gosh. Buried in the Snow? Was it called Buried in the Snow? I went to the last one that she did. The very last one that was posted. And it was interesting being behind the scenes, especially in the crowd of people that we were with and everybody's thoughts on everything. Probably because they were filming a lot of that during the last trial, which I thought was interesting. I have another question. This is Foxy Tran. I think when you're freaking out, you don't think about it. Yeah. And I think that knowing how she felt was helpful, like you said. I think, she's just talking about the way she felt. Body in the snow, body in the snow. Thank you. Body in the snow. So I went to a private screening of that. And I have to say I was kind of shocked by some of the things. And this was in particular one of those moments where my jaw was kind of like, I just had never heard her experience before other than what we've seen. But let's go on to the next clip I have for you because I have curated all these clips for you. And we are going to go to the most important part of the day. Well, not exactly. I think there's a part of the day that's even more important than this part of the day. But what are we going to be talking about? Do you guys know well, you already have it on your screen. Do you guys know what deoxyribonucleic acid is? DNA, impress your friends. Impress your friends. The double helix, the fundamental molecule of life. It makes us who we are. And unless you're an identical twin, then you guys are pretty much the same. But this day was filled with talk about DNA. And it's centered around forensic evidence, the DNA analysis of the taillight debris, or not the taillight debris, the taillight, the debris on the clothing. And the testimony first came from Massachusetts State Police crime lab analyst, and his name was Andre Porto. He detailed DNA findings on John O'Keefe's clothing and that cocktail glass, which I was just saying, could have been one of those broken pieces that was embedded in John's face that Karen says she took out. But also, he is a forensic scientist too, just like Maureen Hartnett from last week, except he specializes in DNA analysis. And he started out by going over how DNA testing worked. And let me just tell you, we are not here for forensic science class, although I do find it very interesting. However, I do think it's very important to know that there are 4 steps: extraction, I hope I get this right, which is breaking open the cells to release the actual DNA. And then there's measuring the DNA amount, which I think is quantitation, amplification, which is making millions of copies, and then detection, which is generating a profile using the instruments that they use to analyze. He expanded on all the quality assurances. They wear personal protection, they wear gloves, masks, they bleach the surfaces that they're working on, they change gloves between samples, and they also do a 2-level review process. So that's important in the grand scheme of how they test. Because remember, one of the key things, I'd love to have a forensic class. Marie said she would love to have a forensics class. I used to want to do like forensic psychology and forensic science so bad. But it's important to note that on direct, they're going to emphasize how well everybody did when they're testing because the defense whole argument is that this entire investigation is botched and we should not rely on anything, right? So they're going to emphasize that. That's why I'm not going to play that part, went over what do you do? What do you wear? Is it qualified by anybody? Does anyone check your work? He talked about how twice a year they do have a proficiency test, and then he was asked where he tested DNA from, and one of the places he went was the taillight. You remember that Maureen testified last week that she took the swabs, and then remember she was like, "Oh, it's not my job to do the testing. I do the collection." So there are a lot of hands that these items go through, which is why the chain of custody is so very important, right? Like where did they go? And also something I want you to look for in this clip is that this man was speaking so fast, okay, when he was giving his findings. The voice stenographer, that's the woman with the little piece over her mouth, she's speaking into that, and she had to reach over and stop him, and he kept doing it. It was so hard to understand because this stuff, it's dense. I actually hate listening to the way they legally and scientifically have to say what the DNA related to, what the item number was. They can't just say, okay, this is a taillight piece. They have to say like 75-15. And I can't with it because I'm like, what are we on? But let's go ahead and listen to it and then I'll break down a little bit of what he's saying for clarity.
And from your comparative analysis from that question item to that of the known standard of John O'Keefe, what did you conclude?
So the DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors, including male DNA. And the DNA profile from this item is at least, so sorry. I'll just restart. So the DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors, including male DNA. And the DNA profile from this item is at least 510 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals. This provides support for an inclusion.
So, right. And you saw she like leaned over and he's like, "Oh, I'll just start again." I felt bad for him because he's clearly very intelligent, like whoosh, over a lot of people's heads, right? But what they were trying to say is that this sample of the DNA from that portion of the taillight had 3 DNA profiles. One was from John O'Keefe, and the other 2 were not big enough to sample and determine a DNA profile. Does that make sense? And then he said it was not million, and that was like a 30 zeros after the one. I mean, I don't think it's that groundbreaking that John O'Keefe's DNA is on a car that he rode in. He dated Karen. I'm sure he's touched the back of that vehicle, especially on a night when you're drinking. Maybe you're a bit wobbly, kind of use it for stability as you're walking to, the passenger side. It's possible. When it's possible, because you have to think when it's possible, then that can open the door for reasonable doubt, right? You can say, well, sure, John O'Keefe's DNA was on there, but like, where did it come from? Was it when you know, was it when he was supposedly hit, or was it just in the normal course of everyday life using the car? So I wanted to make sure I explained that part because then we go on to what's more interesting. And to me, that would have been who else's DNA was on the back? Because wouldn't it be interesting if the DNA was from, somebody else? And we're like, wait a minute, why is that person's DNA on there? That's what I would like to know. But we're going to get into that a little bit later. We got into the hair next that was on the back. Remember the hair that nobody could even see in the picture because the picture was just like blown out. And I'm like, who's taking these photos in this day and age? Like, couldn't even tell it was hair. But there was, let's listen to it first. I always get too far ahead. Let's listen to it first.
That's what an inclusion means.
Now, regarding item 3-6, what is the description of that item?
Yeah, so 3-6 is a root end of hair from exterior passenger side rear panel.
And is that the same vehicle as far as the taillight sample?
Correct.
Now, with respect to hair in general, there's a root end and a shaft end, correct?
Correct.
And what limitations does your lab have with regard to DNA testing of hair?
So when we test hair, we're actually, the root end of the hair, we're looking at any potential skin cells that might be attached to the root end. So that's where the DNA that we're looking for is coming from. And if there's not too many, yeah.
Now, are you familiar with the term based on your training experience known as autosomal DNA?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we're not going to get into autosomal and mitochondrial DNA right now. I love you guys, but we're going to pass. But what I wanted to point out is there was no human DNA detected. It was DNA. Well, okay. So when they said that no human DNA was detected, it's a little bit confusing. It just meant that there was no conclusive DNA to process. It didn't mean that it was animal DNA or anything like that. He also tested the cocktail glass and the blood stain on John's pants, and both came back with John's DNA as an inclusion, which meant that he was a contributor. So we hear words like contributor, inclusion. DNA is very complicated. And even though it's a science, it's very complicated science, and it doesn't always mean what it looks like it means. But inconclusive, right? So inconclusive on the hair, even though it had a root. And then I feel like they sent it to another lab, and we're hearing from that guy today. I might be wrong about that, but I think so. I'm not perfect either, but we did also discuss, he did discuss the blood on his jeans as well. And there were times when I would say like the questions and the answers are so fast and complicated that again, the stenographer, she actually slapped down on the damn witness stand. Like she was like, "Excuse me, what?" So I did have that portion for you. I was like, "Poor guy. He's just trying to do his job." So I think that's this one. Let me click this one down.
Lorton, Virginia.
I'm not sure if the extract was sent, but I know that the shaft of the hair was sent to Bodie.
Now, what testing did you perform on the hair?
I did the regular DNA analysis process on the root end of the hair.
And that was done prior to it being shipped to that external vendor, is that correct?
Correct.
And what conclusions were you able to draw from the testing that you did on the hair?
Yeah, so there was no human DNA detected, and STR analysis was not performed.
Now, what does that mean, sir?
Yeah, so it means that I didn't detect any human DNA. So there might be DNA on there, but it was below what our instrumentation could detect.
Okay, so I just wanted you to hear that so you know that I wasn't just making up the non-human DNA part. Got to be careful.
This provides support for an inclusion.
Thank you, sir. Now, turning your attention to item 7-1.3.1, what is the description related to that item?
Sample from stain B on upper right leg of jeans.
Oh, you're not going to be able to see her hand because I'm in the way. Hold on. Move over here for a minute.
Same jeans as the previous item?
Yes.
Now, were you able to generate a DNA profile from this item, stain B, on the upper right leg of the
Just
jeans?
watch
of
the
Mr.
left
O'Keefe?
side.
Yes, I was. And from your comparative analysis from this questioned item to that of the known standard of John O'Keefe, what did you conclude?
Yep, so the DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors, including male DNA. The DNA profile from this item is at least... The DNA profile from this item is at least 660 non-alien times more likely if it originated from John O'Keefe and 2 unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown, unrelated individuals. This provides support for an inclusion.
Now, sir, with reference to...
It is complicated, and I feel bad. That lady has to take care of, take notes of everything, right? So, but yeah, she slapped the window, not slapped, she put her hand down. But yes, he does talk very fast, and we don't have the same parlance. We don't speak science. So I wondered if the jury was falling asleep. Because the other night I did when I was listening to this, I swear. These findings were being shown to support the Commonwealth's claim that Karen's SUV struck John O'Keefe. So what do you think? Do you think that was compelling? Do you think that his DNA being on the taillight or being on the glass or being on the jeans or on his shirt or even, yeah, like I said, the taillight pieces, what does that do for you? I'm just curious. Like, if you were a juror, how does that make you feel? Do you feel like it's compelling? Do you feel like it really shows that he was hit? And then Kate asked, can't they tell where the person's been just by what contaminant is in their hair shaft along with the time frames? I don't think so. I think you can tell about like former drug use and things like that, but I don't know about where a person's been. I think that's too speculative. Marie said, I'm not sure about where they've been, but I know toxins. Right, that's what I was saying. Exactly. So there could be contaminants, toxins, if you want to call them that. But they also talked about the sneaker DNA, and it turned out to be too complex to compare. There were at least 5 different DNA mixtures, which I found interesting. But recall these items had been transported. Some of the clothing was removed by personnel in the ambulance, and then it was put on the floor at the hospital. And not everyone could have been wearing gloves, right? And there was also fingernail clippings from John O'Keefe, and it was determined that only his DNA was underneath his fingernails. Now, I do want to point out that not usually, sometimes in cases, especially when we're talking about a woman, they can scratch their aggressor, but it's not as common. Like statistically, men are more likely to punch someone than a woman is to scratch their attacker. I don't think that no one else's DNA being under his fingernails said much to me personally, but again, they're just showing everything. But then it was time for the defense. Yannetti is now questioning and he's in cross examination. And he immediately asked about the taillight and whether Andre was asked to compare the DNA to anyone else or just John O'Keefe. So let's listen to that.
Mr. Porto, I would like to start by asking you about item 3-1.1, which you've identified as a sample from the passenger side taillight of the vehicle. Can you orient yourself in your report to that item?
Yes.
And that, of course, was the passenger side taillight that was attached to the vehicle, correct?
Correct.
You were never asked to do any DNA comparison on any pieces of taillight connected with this case, correct?
Let me check my other report.
Marie's asking, not necessarily compelling to you. He maybe touched the taillight once, drank from the glass, or held it. I mean, we know he drank from the glass because we saw the videos, the CCTV footage. So we do know that he drank out of Karen's glass because I remember seeing him drink out of the glass and holding it. They brought it to from one bar to the other. So that cocktail glass was definitely shared, at least by John and um, Karen. And then Marie asked, did he have dog DNA on him? Saliva. It's an interesting question. But Courtney wanted to point out pig DNA. We kind of discussed this, and I'm sure they're going to bring it up again if they haven't already. Remember, I'm one day behind. But I've read into this because I wanted to know, I was like, did a pig attack him? I mean, I'm not, I don't know. I'm not an expert like they are. But what I've heard is that if you eat food, like let's say you had bacon in the morning, that could be why. I don't know. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I read. I'm just reading things on the internet. Let's continue.
For taillight, there was another item that was item 2-3.1, which is sampled from apparent glass on rear bumper, if that's what you're referencing.
Okay, so if I suggested to you that the taillight was plastic, that glass wouldn't have been the taillight, correct?
I don't have, that's beyond my scope of testing.
Gotcha. Okay. With regard to the passenger side taillight, you found that there were 3 contributors of DNA to that taillight attached to the vehicle, correct?
Correct.
One of those contributors appeared to be John O'Keefe. Is that fair to say?
He was included
All
to
right.
the profile.
With regard to the other 2 contributors, who were they?
They could be anybody.
Were you ever asked to compare DNA samples from either Canton Police Detective Kevin Albert or Canton Police Chief Kenneth Berkowitz to the DNA profile that you analyzed from that passenger side taillight?
I was not.
Now, with regard to the broken drinking glass, which is item 3-2.1.1. Do you see that in your report?
I do.
With regard to that, you came up with a DNA profile that also had 3 contributors, correct?
Correct.
One of those contributors appeared to be John O'Keefe, correct?
He was included, correct.
Who were the other 2 contributors?
I don't know. They could be anybody.
So when someone says, I don't know, it could be anybody, reasonable doubt. That's the whole point here. Andre Porto could not determine when or how the DNA was deposited, identify any of those unknown contributors. And he wasn't even asked to compare profiles to Canton PD's Kevin Albert, Kenneth Berkowitz, or anybody else. So that was just another interesting little tidbit. And actually, I said this earlier, but Yannetti emphasized that it was to be expected that John's DNA was on his own clothing and that the multiple unknown contributors were not investigated further on items that had more than just John's DNA, right? And that the DNA could have come from any time, even prior to the night that John died. And they went over the blood evidence as well. 3 contributors on John's genes, but there were 2 unknown again. And like I said, Andre explained it could be anyone. So if it wasn't conclusive, that leaves the jury to be able to conclude that someone else may have touched that area, may have bled there, or just left their DNA somehow, right? But we're also going to be talking about the unstained area of John O'Keefe's genes. So let's hear about that because I thought that was interesting because we were talking about bloodstains, but let's talk about the unstained area, which would be other parts of his genes.
Okay, now, with regard to the unstained area of the exterior of the genes, do you see item 7-1.7.1?
Yes.
You found a DNA profile with regard to that unstained area as well, correct?
Correct.
How many contributors of DNA were there to that unstained area of the genes?
I interpreted it as 4 contributors.
And John O'Keefe was one of those, correct?
He was included in the profile.
His own genes.
Based on the description, yes.
Who were the other 3 contributors to that DNA profile?
I don't know. It could be anybody.
And before we move on to the sneaker, I just wanted to ask.
We're not going to go to the sneaker yet. I'm going to tell you one thing about this first. So, as you heard, there were 3 other people's DNA on the genes in the unstained area. Again, I'm just saying interesting. It's just interesting. There were 5 contributors on the sneaker. And when there's 5 or more, it's automatically not suitable for comparison. So they couldn't even say if John's own DNA was on the sneaker. And on the long sleeve shirt, there were 2 contributors and John on the sleeve. These are just things that I think are going to bolster the reasonable doubt part of the case because anyone can think, well, wait a minute. If somebody grabbed on his jeans, because, there's this theory that he was dragged to that area or picked up by a few different people. Could that be plausible? Sure, it could be plausible. But then we had redirect. Lally came back and wanted to justify why there were multiple contributors. And I think he was expecting Andre Porto to say, oh, that's really common. Let's hear that interaction.
I'm sustaining the objection.
Also, they're very silent
Did
right
you
now.
send those reports to Michael Proctor?
Sustain.
This was something else. This was
Jurors, strike the question.
that was
I have
stricken.
nothing further. Thank you, sir.
Sorry you heard that on the tail end. Again, he was bringing in Michael Proctor, trying to bring it in that he was somebody that handled this evidence. I didn't even mean to play that.
Yes.
Here's what I wanted to play.
Mr. Porto, based on your training and experience and years of doing DNA testing at the lab, when it comes to samples from items of clothing, is it uncommon or common to have multiple contributors?
That depends. It can happen, but it's possible, yes.
Is it something that's a complete anomaly?
I wouldn't say so, no.
Now,
I really think he was waiting for more of a bombshell because on one hand, the Commonwealth's trying to say, like, this happens all the time, multiple contributors. And like somebody pointed out, Marie in the comments said, lots of DNA at bars, especially on the floor. Of course, someone else's DNA can get on you. That's the point. But the jury's listening to all this, and it can still mean reasonable doubt. So we have to just give both sides, the perspective of where it's coming from. He was like, does this happen? Is it anomaly? But I think you understand that not only is this complicated, but I could have people's DNA on me. I could shake somebody's hand. And this is really funny. And it's like TMI, but it's really not. So there's something called a secretor. And some people secrete more DNA than others. And I'm probably even referencing that incorrectly. But some people are more secretors than others, meaning if I shake your hand and maybe I don't have sweaty palms and I don't. Maybe somebody with sweaty palms is more of a secretor and then their DNA would transfer more. Point is, some people are going to have a more higher likelihood of transferring DNA somewhere. If I put my hand down on here, I may or may not leave my DNA. And so Yes, a public place? Absolutely. Did you go to the restroom when you were there? Did your jeans rub against the counter? Because I'm sure there's a lot of DNA there. So there's a lot to say about this, and I don't think it necessarily means there's this like big bombshell. But next on the stand, I hope I pronounced this person's name right, was another forensic scientist two, number two, and this is Ashley Vallier. Vallier. She testified about the physical evidence collected and analyzed, and hers was well, her specialties were like trace evidence, arson, explosives, and she's also from the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab. She analyzed the broken taillight pieces to determine if the pieces mechanically fit together, showing that they used to be one whole piece. And when asked how many pieces, she said over 10 suspected broken taillight pieces. I'm going to show you pictures and I hope I got them up here right. Show you pictures in 1 second because it was too hard to go through and also what happened? There were glass that was also recovered from 34 Fairview, the scene. And the taillight pieces were compared to the other taillight. So they took that one off, I'm guessing, and they compared to kind of piece together all of the tiny pieces. So I want to also look at what they were given. And I just have pictures. I'm going to give you pictures. Hang on. Let me change my scene here. All right. Let's look at some pictures. Oh, you're not going to see me. Hang on. Well, you don't really need to see me. So we've got this broken taillight with some odds and ends on the left side there. See what else they showed? They showed this pieces. I would love to know. I think there is going to be a picture of all of them. Some clear pieces, more pieces of red, black, almost like a silver and a clear. These kind of look like they could be glass, but they look like clear plastic. Oh, wait, that is glass because that's the straw, right? Is that the straw at the top? Is that just me or is that the straw? Like the cocktail glass straw? And then here's another piece. More pieces. Lots of little pieces in this one. And I thought this was the glass pieces, but they kind of also look plastic to me. So let me know if you remember. More plastic pieces. Just so you can see, this was the glass fragment evidence bag. And this was one of the pieces of glass. You can kind of tell it's glass because see how the upper left-hand side, kind of see how it's glass there. And you can see Trooper Proctor's name on this bag. 3 pieces of, what does that say? Can't even read that. Plastic and 5 pieces of red plastic, clear plastic and red plastic. More pieces. More pieces. And then we have one more. This is how it all fit together. As far as what I could see in court, you can see all the little tags. And so there was the whole taillight. But I want to tell you something. Of course I do. My gut reaction right when I saw all those pieces was, wow, that's a lot of pieces. Because I was thinking, I've never seen this, but then my husband was like, well, how old was the car? And he was asking me all these questions. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. But do they usually shatter or crack? Because I've just never seen any on my personal car shatter because I've hit things and they crack for sure. But I know I shouldn't bring in any evidence besides what's in the courtroom because I'm trying to be like a 13th juror, but I saw multiple videos. Tell me if you saw them. I saw multiple videos on YouTube where people with hammers were banging on these same exact lights and they don't even break. So I'm confused. But lots of fragments, lots of plastic fragments. I want to get to some of your comments though, because some of these were interesting. Um, let's see. Kay said some people can also secrete a different DNA, one in the blood and skin, and a whole different in their seminal fluid. Interesting. Did not even know that. Someone said maybe it's the straw or maybe it's a seal gem. I think they were showing the glass though in that one, so that's why I was like, oh wait, that looks like the straw. Let's go back to the other scene. And let's see if I have any notes for this one. No, because this was me showing you all those pieces. I don't need that. Okay, so let's focus back on Ashley. She was back talking about all of what she did, what she analyzed, and let's hear it. Because I think this part was interesting.
Now, if I could turn your attention to item 7-5, piece of plastic red recovered from 34 Fairview Road. What did you conclude as far as your physical match analysis just within that single item?
There was no physical match noted among those 3 pieces of apparent plastic.
And when you say no physical match found from the different pieces within that item, what does that mean?
The broken edges of each piece did not align.
So the broken edges of the individual pieces within item 7-5 did not fit together with the broken edges of pieces within item 7-5, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So that was a little confusing. I think I'm going to cut off the beginning. What he was asking. And he had to do this because otherwise the defense is going to come up and be like, wait a minute, they didn't match. And then it's going to be even more of a bombshell, right? There were 3 pieces. Like most of them fit like a puzzle, but then there were like 3 that did not. Like their edges wouldn't match up. So there were, I don't, it was like 7-6, 7, there was just, that was the numbers of everything that didn't have a place to fit, which could be explainable because when something breaks, there can be little pieces that come off that are so small that you've broken something before, right? And it just like doesn't go back together exactly. So that could be it. There was also some talk about the debris. Again, remember the debris, the dirt, the fibers. There were small little pieces of glass, I believe, too. But we're going to listen to that.
So it was 5 different items. So it was debris collected from, labeled as coming from the clothing. There was mostly debris, some apparent fibers.
Are there any pieces of apparent plastic contained within the debris?
Yes.
Was there dirt contained within the debris?
Yes.
And that debris was labeled as an item 17-18.18, is that correct?
I believe so.
And what is it that you did with the debris from the gray long sleeve shirt and the orange t-shirt?
So those are all packaged in like glassine folds. And I looked through it and documented it.
When you say you documented it, did you look at it under a microscope?
Yes.
So you did an examination under a microscope, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you measure some of those items contained within the debris?
Yes.
Specifically, did you measure items of apparent clear plastic contained within the debris?
Yes.
And what did you measure those items to be?
The piece of clear apparent plastic was approximately 1/8 inch by 1/16 inch.
This was interesting to me, but also I'm a little confused. I understand there was debris that was collected as part of John's clothing. So, on one hand, I think the Commonwealth is trying to say, look, this got embedded in his clothing, these little tiny pieces of plastic. This shows he was hit by the taillight. I guess I'm just not understanding maybe this part, but how? How? To me, this is just me. Don't come for me for saying this. To me, this feels like a stretch. It almost feels like, what? Like, it almost just feels like it goes more toward, I wouldn't even bring this up. If I was the Commonwealth, I don't even think I would bring this up. I understand where they're trying to go with it, but to me, it feels weird. It feels like, no, that's almost like somebody sprinkled, like was like, here's his clothes in a bag. I'm gonna sprinkle a couple little tiny pieces in here to drive home the point that he was hit. Uh, This is just my feelings. If I were a juror, I would be thinking that's kind of weird. Like, would it really be on his clothes like that? Or is just this like further trying to make a point? I don't know. But somebody had a question here. Phoenix Rising Tarot said, interesting, looked like they didn't match on the pictures. So we are going to get to that because on cross examination, Yannetti asked about things like handling of the clothing. That was one big thing because, again, remember, we're going to be discussing this again and again and again. They're going to be like a broken record because they don't want the jury to forget botched investigation, chain of custody bad. So he's going to keep talking about that. But we're also going to get into this whole missing piece and all that. Kay said he could have fallen on it and it got stuck in his clothes. Yeah, I guess I could see that happening, but they're like tiny. Like this is debris. So like debris would like be like what you get off your kid's sock. You know, like nothing major where you're picking pieces off, like big pieces that are stuck, but just like tiny little, almost like I don't want to say microscopic, but tiny little pieces. All right, so we are going to move to this next part right here. Just want to make sure I'm doing this right. Here we go.
I received the debris labeled as coming from the clothing. I never saw the clothing at all.
Right, but you're aware that your lab received clothing before the debris got to you, correct?
Yes.
And your understanding was that that was John O'Keefe's clothing in which he was found on January 29th of 2022, correct?
It's labeled as coming from him. I'm not sure of the date that it was found.
Okay. You understand the procedure of that goes on at your lab when it receives evidence?
Yes.
And you know that once clothing is brought to your lab, it's given evidence numbers, correct?
Yes.
And then one of your colleagues at the lab handled the clothing and or examined it, correct, before it came to you?
Yes.
And your understanding is that one of your colleagues retrieved debris from those items of clothing and then packaged it in a fold before it got to you, correct?
Yes.
You then open up the fold and you look at the debris, correct?
Yes.
You never saw that debris inside the clothing, correct?
Correct.
And the pieces of clothing that come in are given evidence numbers when your lab receives them, correct?
Yes.
For instance, the orange T-shirt was given or was named item number 7-17,
Yes.
and the gray long sleeve shirt was item 7-18, correct?
Yes.
And your lab is accredited, correct?
Yes.
There is a complete chain of custody from the moment the clothing was brought to the lab to when the debris was removed from the clothing, ultimately to when you're in court today handling the items, correct?
Yes. Our in-lab chain of custody extends from when we receive it to when the submitting agent, it is returned to the submitting agency.
Okay. And you have complete confidence that the chain of custody at your lab is effective at making sure that the evidence does not get lost or mixed up or contaminated, right?
I mean, the chain of custody is meant to track where a piece of evidence is. The evidence unit also does inventories and audits to make sure that things are where they're supposed to be.
And you have confidence in your lab's chain of custody policies and procedures, correct?
Yes.
But you'll agree that your lab cannot control who handled the clothing before it arrived at your lab, correct?
Yes.
There are times in which crime scene technicians or criminalists from your lab actually participate in the search for evidence at a crime scene, do they not?
Some of the people at the lab are crime scene responders, yes.
There are times when they actually take custody of evidence. Again, I'm talking about people from your lab, professionals. They take custody right from the crime scene and transport that evidence to your lab, correct?
Yes.
In those circumstances, your lab would have a complete chain of custody from discovery to seizure to testing or whatever comparison you're doing until you release the items, correct?
Yes, but the electronic chain of custody doesn't start until that item is entered into our LIMS system at the lab.
Right, but when it's entered in, it would be entered in as having been seized by somebody from your lab, correct? In the hypothetical that I'm giving you.
Yeah, there's an evidence submission form that says that this crime scene responder submitted it to the laboratory.
There are other cases, however, when the evidence is brought to your lab by the police, correct?
Yes.
Local departments have access to your lab?
For evidence drop-off, yes.
The state police have access to your lab for evidence drop-off?
Yes.
And in this case, it was not a criminalist or other professional from your lab who seized the clothing and brought it to your lab, correct?
I'm not sure.
Do you have a record of that in your report in terms of who it was that brought the material to your lab?
I could look at the evidence submission form to see who.
With the court's permission?
Yes.
You guys know who it's going to be.
Okay.
There's the evidence bag. I think I already showed you this. Spoiler alert. Oh, it's just a fan. I wanted to put something up on the screen. Marie said, I always wondered if she threw the glass in her fury. I guess you were saying furor. And he was holding it and tossed it towards a car as it was coming at him. Plausible? No, he's not talking in circles. He's actually, somebody asked, Kay, is he talking in circles? No, he's not talking in circles. He's actually trying to make a point. And in order to do that in court, you have to make every little dot, right? When you're connecting the dots, you have to make all the little dots. So what he's doing is he's not talking in circles. He's having to say, okay, now, do police officers drop things off? Yeah. Do crime scene technicians drop things off or bring things to the lab? Yes, because they go to the crime scene. So he's trying to make sure the jury understands that somebody like Proctor, because spoiler alert, that's who brought the clothing, so on and so forth. That's the point he's trying to make. But to get to that point in court, you can't just ask one question. You have to connect all the little dots. No worries about any typos. I do it all the time. Okay, let's go forward. Sorry that I don't want to fast forward too much because see if I can get there. Oh, there it is.
I do.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Manning.
Having reviewed your reports, can you testify to
Okay, so one thing I didn't really answer because I looked at another question. Through the glass. So you're saying she threw it, it fell on the floor, he picked it up, and then he was holding it, and then he threw it at the car. Could be? I think I already said could be. I think I already said that. She said he was holding the clasp when he got out of the car, but like, again, how are we gonna know for sure? But it's a good theory. There's a lot of theories out there. I know. I have no idea. So I can't really make too much of a comment.
the jury about who it was that brought this evidence into the lab?
So you can tell us. Okay.
Okay. So submission 7, all the items that are 7 dash, was submitted by Trooper Michael Proctor.
That's all we were getting at. That whole thing that looked like he was talking in circles was just to say everything with 7 dash, and I believe that was the taillight pieces, the clothing, all of that came in by Trooper Proctor. So that's kind of what they were trying to get at. There's an internal chain of custody, and that began on March 14th of 2022, which was 6 weeks after the incident on January 29th. And the clothing was submitted by former trooper Michael Proctor. And she could not account for where the clothing, how it was handled, what location it came from during the 6 weeks. There was that gap. So, again, all I'm trying to show is this is to have more reasonable doubt, right? Because it can suggest to the jury contamination, it can suggest planting. So, those things, right? She couldn't verify who had access to John O'Keefe's clothing before it arrived at the lab. So, again, it just raises concerns. Was it planted? Was the debris transferred? Were pieces of plastic put there? So on and so forth. Kind of already went over that. But all the 7 dash items were handled by Proctor. And that's a big deal because we've been talking about the 7 dash items. You didn't hear it, but that's what all the items are, like 7-5, 7 dash. We've been hearing that over and over again. So that's why Yannetti's bringing that up because he's like, hey, all the 7 dash items. And he's like, yep, touched by Proctor. It was also confirmed that the reconstruction of the taillight was missing a piece, which I said we would get to. And I think that was probably the most important, which is why I put in my thumbnail. But I also wanted to highlight another comment from P. It says she'd have to drive 24 miles an hour in a 2 to 3 foot space in wintry weather. Is she a fast and furious character? Don't know yet. My whole question, but it never really got answered yet. I don't know what kind of car. I mean, I know what kind of car she has, but does it have like 4-wheel drive, 2-wheel drive? Could her tires spin and get up to a certain speed if she was like pushing on the gas? And then they could spin and that would equate to the 24 miles an hour. Just curious. I'm not an expert. And then P also added a comment, not plausible to throw glass at a taillight when she reversed into him at 24 miles an hour, 3 to 4 feet in wintry conditions. And I like that we have opinions. Remember, we have to pretend that we are all people on a jury. That's all we are. We come from different backgrounds, different experiences, different perspectives. And I think that's really important. So always just take it into consideration. Practice. Courtney, practice here. I talked to my dad on the phone a couple days ago and I was like, I wish I could have him as a guest. I don't think he would allow it. Kay commented, yeah, I'm leaning more and more towards planning. I thought in the second something, but even more so now. Plausible, right? Could happen. I want to read another comment by Phoenix Rising Tarot said, I bet Proctor wasn't wearing gloves when he handled the evidence, hence his DNA on the jeans. Plausible that he did plant evidence because he was dodgy. He could have. It's an interesting thought. Wait, Marie said, I'm not saying he threw it at the taillight, just threw it in general, like maybe threw it on the floor. Okay, let's listen to this last part and then we'll talk again. I think it's important.
Once you reconstructed the taillight, you'll agree with me that it was missing a piece, correct? Or pieces?
There was an empty spot on the overall reconstruction, yes.
Were you ever provided with any pieces of taillight that would have filled in that missing spot?
No.
Were you ever provided or told about any pieces recovered from One Meadows Ave in Canton?
No.
Were you ever told about a collision at One Meadows Ave in Canton?
Sustained.
In any case, you'll agree with me there was no glass in that taillight at all, correct?
Within the taillight, I classified them as apparent plastic pieces.
There's no glass as part of the taillight, correct?
I mean, it depends on what you call, like, the bulbs usually have glass as far as I'm aware.
Those are very, very thin glass, though, correct? Those bulbs?
Yes.
All right. Now, your lab received clothing in connection with this case. You've testified to that, correct?
I don't think I was going to play that part. I just wanted to get at the whole idea that there was this missing piece. And what he's trying to say is that, remember that little collision that happened at One Meadows, which is where John lived, where Karen was backing out and we could see that his traverse moved. So there was contact made between that portion of her taillight area and his vehicle. We know that. We saw it on the ring camera footage. So he's just trying to show the jury that there is a possibility that the missing piece came from when that little collision occurred. And that was the piece that was missing that enabled whoever to do whatever with the taillight. Because if that little piece came off somewhere, don't know where, just imagine this, because I like to do both sides. Imagine when she hit his car, it cracked. Didn't come all the way off, but it cracked enough for it to like kind of hang or, pop a little bit. Just hear me out. Drove away. Later, because I swear, and you can remind me if you did, someone, it might have been Karen, said they either picked off a piece, or I know Carrie and Jen said something about seeing a piece sticking out and that they thought it was going to catch on somebody's clothing. That's been said. So just imagine that piece is missing and it gives Proctor an idea. Hey, I can break off these other pieces. Because it is true in physics, and somebody mentioned physics, it is true that like when something's already, I don't know the physics word for it, but when something's already damaged, it's easier to damage something that's already loose and, you know, has the ability to be more mobile than something that hasn't broken. So just my theory of like how that could have possibly happened. And I think that's the point that Unity's trying to make. There's another comment though. P said, sheer physics and her phone connecting to John's home Wi Fi makes the Commonwealth's case fundamentally flawed. I think we're going to hear a lot about that next because I did want to talk about what happened during the lunch break the day before. There was an argument outside of the jury's presence because there was a report submitted on May 8th. And during this trial, there's a new report submitted by Mr. Burgess. And this is the prosecution's digital forensic analyst. He's the accident reconstruction and biomechanics company representative from Aperture. Well, he submitted a new finding, basically changing the time in which they believe the trigger event occurred, meaning when John was hit, supposedly by the SUV, right? And the defense received this documentation on May 11th. So, of course, Alessi was arguing, the defense was arguing that this is an ambush. They used that same word because I think it was used against them at one point. And they were saying, how can we possibly reevaluate everything and go over our witnesses with this new documentation and this new time? But Canoni already said she didn't see it this way. She didn't see it as a surprise. And mind you, this is after ARCA had already submitted their time frame and all that. So anyway, during the lunch break, Alessi spoke to Canoni, and he did say that they're going to need, I think he said at least 4 days to go over this, and they're going to need a little bit more time. I don't know how I feel about it. I feel like that's pretty big. Like, I almost feel like it just looks bad. But Canoni said this, and I do respect this. Canoni said, you know what? You have so much leeway. I'm going to give you a lot of leeway. She's talking to the defense. I'm going to give you a lot of leeway to cross examine him to the, fullest extent, right? So that's what was happening there. But Alessi wanted to question him outside of the presence of the jury, voir dire. He wanted to do that so that he could ask all the questions. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's what's happening today. I think this was the time when he said what he wanted, and I think that's happening today. But remember, I'm a day behind. And I will be for right now. I don't know if I'll ever be to the point where I can recap the same day, but look, I did it in an hour today. So give me a little bit of credit for doing it in an hour. Somebody asked, let's see. Oh, Marie said, my husband was driving 15 miles an hour down our long driveway and it felt fast. Yeah. And Marie also said, I'd like to know her RPMs to see just how hard she put the pedal to the metal. I think she intended to drive away, but put it in reverse by accident, just speculation. Not too bad for a speculation. Marie said, how fast was she going when she hit his car? I don't know. I think that'll come out probably when we talk about accident reconstruction. Courtney agrees with what I was going to say. Those are really good questions. I think they're going to come out. Kay said, also, if he was hit by the car, shouldn't he have bruising in the shape of the car part? I think I discussed a little bit of this. This was just a personal thing that I wanted to personal anecdote, I guess you could say. I got hit by a Jeep when I was about 11 years old. Maybe I was 10 or 11 years old, and I was rollerblading. I got hit by a Jeep. And I know you're not going to believe me, but it's the truth. A few days later, my leg had like a contusion on my thigh, and there were marks from the Jeep. Like you could tell the grill of the Jeep was like in my leg. So, you know, maybe sometimes it just really depends on like where someone's hit. But remember that the medical examiner said that she didn't find any evidence of a vehicle striking John O'Keefe, because in motor vehicle type of injuries, you usually see injuries to the lower extremities, and there was no evidence of that. So keep it in mind. But my brain says, because my brain is very, back and forth and back and forth. I'm like, well, what if he was kneeling down? Courtney, remember we always talk about this? What if he was kneeling? What if he dropped the glass? What if the glass fell? What if he dropped the glass and he's like, oh, shoot, I dropped the glass. And he went to go pick it up and she backed up, maybe not intentionally. Like, let's say she just had a few too many drinks and backed up and hit him somewhere else. But my question always remains, how did he get to that portion of the lawn? How did he get to that portion of the lawn? I guess that's just where I'm a little bit, not really sure. Phoenix Rising Tarot said, didn't the prosecution change a lot of the reports? Yes, that's what just happened. So I don't know about a lot of the reports, but their accident reconstruction, Mr. Burgess changed his time frame after he got the report from the other witness, which is the ARCA witnesses. Courtney's like, yay, getting a groove down. I'm trying. By the way, I have a couple little tiny announcements because we're at the end, but I'll get to some of your other questions too. I have a few videos coming out on this channel to look out for, and I will try to post them on other like community tabs and whatnot, but subscribe here and do your notifications. I also have a Patreon where I'm doing a lot more behind the scenes and things like that, but there's always going to be free stuff, so don't feel inclined to do that unless you really want to. I did put out a Brian Koberger pretrial hearing little recap on Patreon today. However, don't worry, because all of that is going to be in the next video that I put out. There's going to be a lot in the video I put out, and that video is going to come out, and then I'm doing a Diddy video. I wasn't going to do a Diddy video. I wasn't going to do a Diddy video. Courtney, I wasn't going to do a Diddy video. Try to say that. But a lot of you don't know this. I don't know if I'll mention in the video or not, but I've worked with P. Diddy before, Sean Combs. I was in a music video with him. Not that that gives me any kind of knowledge above and beyond anybody else, but it does, because I was on set with him for like 12 hours. So I feel like I can observe and have my own opinion. But that's why I'm doing it. I felt like, you know what? I kind of do want to recap what I've noticed happening in the week that the trial has been going on. And I think that it would be interesting for us to talk about as well. And maybe we can do like a one-off live stream just talking about current things that are going on that's not Karen Reed related. But before we go, um, oh, darn it, you didn't see the notification? I'm sorry for not seeing those. Cuffy said, do we know what direction his head was in? No, it's like hard. I mean, like, how would we know, right? Was it towards the driveway? Was it away from the driveway? I mean, who knows? And then Kay said, I'm thinking they had a fight at his, and she threw the glass included and hit him over the head with something and moved the body. Oh, you're thinking she like got out and moved it? Ooh, I don't know about that. It's a little ballsy. Courtney and I have already kind of talked about this, but we thought maybe the snowplow was the only thing that Courtney keeps thinking threw him up on the lawn. Just a theory. British Queen said, hey, beautiful Kimbyrleigha, I'm so happy to see you live. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you're here. So those are some upcoming things you can look for on this channel. I'm going to be I'm going to be doing a Brian Koberger case probably in the next few days. I'm going to be recapping some of the Diddy stuff. I'm trying to make it so simple so that you do not have to keep track of like daily recaps on Diddy, like what's going on, what was he in prison for? Or sorry, what was he in jail for? Not prison. Am I foreshadowing? What was he in jail for? Why are these charges against him? What's going on? How did he get to this moment? And so it'll be like music mogul to federal trial, something like that. Well, we know they had a fight. Marie said, well, we know they had a fight. Well, we know that they were arguing, but it's not that uncommon of their usual arguments, I would say, because if you look back, they're always bickering. They're always bickering, right? And we've already seen the text messages, right? We've already seen a lot of what they were bickering about. But sure, they had some kind of argument. Karen said that, but I don't know if it pertains to this very moment or not. She did say that she was regretful because her last moment with him was in anger. But do I think it got to, a murderous rage of intentionally hitting him? I'm not really sure they've proven that yet. Marie said, the arm looks more like edge of a plow than a dog attack. Courtney and I pulled up photos of a plow and I tried to ask my dad, but he didn't know. I was like, Dad, what's on the end of the plows in Canton? Because he lived there. He's like, I don't know. You have to go look. The plow is called Frankenstein, and I tried looking that up. If y'all find a picture of Frankenstein, like the actual plow, it's named Frankenstein, right? Or am I just Frankenstein? I think it's like an old plow that Lucky, the guy who drove it, said it was named Frankenstein. If you can find a picture of that plow, that particular one, the specific one, I would love to take a look at it. Oh my goodness, I'm not going to say her name right. Radhika. Albert family killed him, and I have a feeling everyone is covering this up. Karen is innocent. Lots of people think that way. Marie said, I think it was accidental, which could also be what happened, right? And we've discussed that as well. We're like, you know what? What if it was an accident? If it was an accident, what would you want to be the consequence? I'm just kind of curious. Like, what would you want the consequence to be if it was an accident? I know that in Massachusetts, the difference between you having to spend a lot more time in jail is the intoxication. We know Karen was intoxicated. I don't think that's at issue, so to speak, even though the defense is trying to say, like, she really wasn't as intoxicated. There's a different tolerance for everybody, right? But if it was accidental, what do you think the consequences should be? Somebody lost their life. So, and the person was drinking, which in the grand scheme of Massachusetts, that could be, I believe, I think it can all go all the way up to life. I think it might be 25 years. It depends on the circumstances. But I've had fun talking to all of you on these live streams. Thank you for helping me practice. Marie said, I looked up dog attacks on arms, and dogs tend to tug and pull and didn't look like that. I also wanted to point out my mom was mauled by a dog like a few years ago, and hers did look exactly like that. So it's hard because I'm like, wait a minute, my mom's looked like that. Like the claw marks that the dog made on my mom's arm look so similar. She was on a bike around the neighborhood, and a dog came up and attacked her. Marie said, I'm curious if you've seen the movie Juror number 2. No, I haven't. I don't get around to watching a lot of movies. Am I saying your name right? Radiha? Radiha? Let me know if I'm saying that wrong. Says, I just hope Karen and John gets justice. And Rachel says, I believe it's possible she might have done it, but I can't say it's beyond a reasonable doubt. The investigation is what truly failed the victim because it's only added reasonable doubt. It's kind of where my mindset is because when I go into a case, I'm not looking at who the defendant is. I'm not looking at them and saying, well, I don't like this person or they did this or they're a cheater. What I mean, she's not on trial for that. She's not on trial for being a bad person or a cheater, or somebody who argues or drinks a lot. She's on trial for harming somebody, for hurting them. So I kind of have to look at the evidence and the law and then apply it to all the facts that I've heard in the courtroom. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to stay like focused on being a 13th juror. And Marie said, yeah, not all dog attacks are equal. And I will watch it if I can get around to it. I'm so busy, but if I can get around to it, I will watch it for you, Marie. And then I will report back to you and tell you what I think. So join me on the next episode of Karen Reed's Retrial Recaps. I should be coming up tomorrow, but right now I have to go film the Diddy video. And again, if you're not interested in that case, totally fine. But I'm sure there's some people that just kind of want to understand and know what's going on. So I'm going to recap it for you. So stay tuned for all of that. Thank you so much for being here with me today. And if you're on the replay, hello, leave a comment below to let me know that you are here. And I will see you in my next video. Bye. Have a good night.